Hello, students. It's week 5, and we are continuing our journey into the demographic transition model and agriculture specifically. And really, I want to start out with talking about the word revolution because in last week's lectures and in the reading, you've read the word agricultural revolution or multiple agricultural revolutions. And the word revolution is something we shouldn't throw around lightly. We need to make sure that we know what that means. It means massive changes from the bottom up or from the top down so that society and life is unrecognizable from previous eras of history. So when we talk about the American Revolution, it's because there was a huge, an amputation kind of England having control over the life and economics, et cetera, of people in the colonies. And so it was a huge change when the people in the colonies began to be recognized as an independent nation in and of themselves and control their own governance. So agriculture was a revolution because those other 3 subsistence strategies that I mentioned are not wiped out of practice in the world, but are so substantially changed by the fact that agricultural innovations become part of human norms and habits and customs that populations can increase extremely quickly. And so you see this in stage 2 of the demographic transition model. Now, in the agriculture chapter, when you're reading the first few pages and it talks about subsistence for the whole of human history, the authors incorrectly say that agriculture has been the subsistence strategy for the bulk of human history. Anthropologists will beg to differ on that because horticulture, which I think your textbook authors call subsistence agriculture, is actually only about 12,000 years old, and foragers, human beings, the way we, early modern humans, the way we know them through today, have been around since, for 40,000 years at least. Right. So anyway, foraging kept the human creature alive for the majority of human history. And then subsistence agriculture and the domestication of animals, which we call horticulture in horticulture and pastoralism, came about much later. Okay. So early agriculture, though, early subsistence agriculture occurred toward the end of this stage, which we don't have a definite timeline to give you for that. Remember, in geography class, we're not going to ask you to, give me a hard and fast date. This happened at 9 a.m. on this particular day of the week. We want to know why, right? Why is our main question, not when, who, but why and where questions, right? Okay, so agriculture began to be part of human innovative practices, and because surplus was allowed to be produced, you see population rates increasing quite a bit. And please notice this death rate here is dropping, and that has a direct relationship to the sudden boom of food supply. When people are being born, more people are able to survive because there is food security. Okay. However, this demographic transition model, remember, we're just really looking at 3 variables here, and that's really puts it on a basic level, and there's more details and more nuances that we need to understand in order to be able to fully grasp what this demographic transition is telling us and what revolution means in terms of agricultural revolution. So, okay. So agriculture enabled surplus. That's why the population increased, because there was food security, and therefore more people who were born could survive to later eras of their life. Okay. And because of this, we have some interesting developments in population theory. There is a philosopher, I guess you would call him. He was a theologian, but worked as a philosopher. Like you might have heard of Charles Darwin before. He was a theologian also who worked as a naturalist. Well, another British theologian named Thomas Malthus studied population trends, and in the late 1700s, which is really at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which changed agriculture significantly yet again, the Industrial Revolution, which brought about manufacturing and the invention of tools that could take place of human being work, manual labor, manos meaning your hands. Manual labor used to be the only way that you could conduct farming effectively. You had to have people in the fields. However, with the Industrial Revolution, certain people were able to be replaced on the farm because machines were simple machines. I don't even mean like, the steam engine that was actually run by gears and things, but just plows were able to be used in order to take the place of 6, 8, 12, however many people who used to have to do the same work. Now you could do it with a horse or some kind of beast of burden and plow. And so you end up with quite a different change in social structure within agriculture. A huge shift occurred with the Industrial Revolution from the kind of agriculture that occurred prior to the invention of machines. So let me switch our background here and look at this second agricultural revolution information from that same website I used as a background in one of last week's videos. The second agricultural revolution saw some important changes in social structure. Again, we're talking about revolution, and it coincides with the Industrial Revolution, which meant that mechanization was added to agricultural processes, which took the place of human being labor in the in the food getting strategy. Okay. However, when we look at this increase, let's see, where is it? There we go. When we look at this population increase, you see that the birth rate is really, really high. Centuries and centuries and centuries of a really high birth rate, those habits don't go away right away. And even though the second agricultural revolution coinciding with the Industrial Revolution meant that fewer people were needed to work on farms, nonetheless, people were in the habit of having a lot of children. Why? Because they are the cheapest labor you can have on a farm. They are, you have your own labor force, essentially, the larger the family is. And also, there had been really a habit of having a lot of children, because you could pretty much count on every third one or so not making it to adulthood, because there were issues with medical knowledge that had not been focused on yet. The food getting strategy was the only thing that people focused on really up until around the second stage of demographic transition, when there was a population boom, because food was scarce. Food insecurity was a big deal, but agriculture in general, the first agricultural revolution, meant that surplus was available, and now all of a sudden the food insecurity that you had been experiencing as a society went away, and therefore there was a population boom. And that's why we see the change in this population pyramid here from, small or no growth to steady growth, steady upward growth toward this third stage of demographic transition. Okay, so there are some issues with social stratification that I'll talk about in another video soon, and with division of labor and social inequality. These social problems, or the things that you and I know about today as social problems, including things like wealth and poverty, or starvation and food insecurity, because food now is a commodity that needs to be sold for a profit. In previous subsistence strategies, foraging, horticulture, and pastoralism, food is seen as a basic human right because we need it to survive. But when surplus occurs, and somebody owns that surplus, land ownership is also part of the revolutionary changes that occurred from those original 3 subsistence strategies to agriculture. When that change happens, you've got such drastic division of labor and gender stratification, all kinds of social stratification and hierarchy, that were not part of the big social structure before the agricultural revolution. So there are some trade-offs. It's wonderful to have this great big boom in population, and you don't have to worry about food security anymore. However, some of the social ills that you and I see in our lifetime, I don't know whether you yourself are an activist for certain social justice issues, but some of the social ills that you and I at least see being fought in society today, female rights, homosexual rights, racial equality, all of these different things were not an issue until there was the drastic social stratification that took place during that population boom, and that land ownership, worker, peasant, slave, landowner, division of labor issues that occurred because of the mechanization of agriculture during the Industrial Revolution. So the population boomed, and because agriculture was mechanized, philosophers like Thomas Malthus, who I mentioned before, began to make observations about society and the lack of the need to have a whole lot of children in previous days of agriculture went away. That was a bad way to say that. Let me find another. Mechanized labor meant that you needed fewer people to work on the farms. So families did not have to be so big anymore. But people were still having huge families. And those families were growing up to later stages of life because food was much more available, much more readily available to more people. So people like Thomas Malthus, who studied population, looked at this boom and looked at the way food was being produced through the early stages. He wrote during the very early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and he said that food was being produced on an arithmetic plane. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in order is arithmetic. And instead, he said that people were reproducing on a geometric line. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, it doubled every time. So there were eventually going to be so many people on the planet that the food supply could not keep up, and we were going to have to exercise population controls in order just to survive as a population, just to survive as a planet. So he has some people say that he has some controversial kind of attitudes about the population because though he was a clergyman, he recognized that things like birth control, which is very often against religious beliefs, and homosexuality, which is very often against religious beliefs, he argued that those kinds of behaviors could help control the population. And he also argued for a greater increase in the status of women in society, higher education levels for women to postpone their reproductive careers, so to speak, so that it was not possible for them to have so many children. He also talked about pandemics and issues like the plague, like I've mentioned before, as necessary parts of the human condition to control population. He would say that there's nothing like a good coronavirus to come through to wipe out whatever percentage of the population needs to be wiped out. He would also say, and again, this is Malthus, not Mrs. T, he would also say, using Herbert Spencer's idea of survival of the fittest that Charles Darwin adapted for biological evolution, he would also say, the people in the population who die from these pandemics that come through are the weakest links anyway, so to speak, and we don't need their genetics in the population. Harsh, but that's what evolutionary theory really is all about. So So anyway, Thomas Malthus is like a population control guy, and he advocated for governments really to intervene and make it compulsory for people to control their reproductive health. So we're going to be looking at those kinds of issues further in an additional lecture. Bye.